understand.
So, after seeing that trailer, how many of you are excited for HBO's The Last of Us? Today, we are getting into my trailer breakdown for this. I know I'm a little bit late to it, doing it the day afterwards, but I could not resist as I do want to cover this on the channel, so we're going to get into a bit of a breakdown on exactly what this The Last of Us teaser trailer gives us. So, as many of you, I assume, already know, I mean, I bet there's some people completely brand new to this. They're just like, what is this? This looks pretty cool. The Last of Us is a very, very popular PlayStation game, and now we are getting a live action show starring Pedro Pascal playing the role of Joel, and of course, Bella Ramsey as Ellie. So, as we know, the game, or I keep saying as we know, but again, if you don't know, the game picks up with Joel and his daughter Sarah right on the precipice of this outbreak of infected. So it's kind of basically zombies, but what I kind of like about this infection is a bit more inventive than your typical zombie virus outbreak, albeit it is this somewhat parasitical fungal infection that turns you into a brain dead kind of biting zombie, if you will. And it was a really crazy opening as we see Joel, his daughter Sarah, and his brother Tommy driving away as the world more or less shuts down. They even run into various infected, and we even see glimpses of this in this trailer happening in the show. And what I like about what this trailer gives us, this little teaser trailer, is the attention to detail of everything is really shot by shot in some cases. Take this for example, when we see in this teaser Joel and Ellie in the car, it starts crashing through here. That is taken right out of the game, and just various other shots in this trailer of the cityscape at night. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and obviously this is an adaptation of the video game, but with certain shows, for example Halo, which I'm sure many of you enjoy, my rule of thumb is always innovate but don't necessarily deviate, because that can alienate fans, and it seems that The Last of Us show isn't deviating. Of course, they're going to innovate here, whereas the Halo show, on a lot of fans' minds, is definitely walking the line of deviation. Now, on top of this, we get more horrific shots here of what looks like a bunch of infected feeding on the floor, and then all of a sudden, one of them just props up as if they've come to the attention of, hey, I need to infect you, I need to bite you, as we see Joel here is carrying his daughter Sarah. What's also pretty awesome is that they've added like a whole new cinematic level to this as they're escaping this town. We see a freaking plane crashing down there, so you'd have to think the infected on there just started taking over in the skies, and it got to the point of where it's literally crashing down in the background. I'm pretty sure that that part doesn't happen in the beginning of the game. Additionally, as we were seeing Joel carrying Sarah in the shot when the infected pops up, we get another shot later with Joel running as he's holding Sarah through what looks to be this store. And I assume many of you watching this are fans of the game, and you'd already know that Joel always wears the watch that Sarah gifted to him in the very opening. And given how they're diving into the before the outbreak scenes that we're seeing in this teaser, we'll definitely be seeing that happen. And we see that very same watch on Joel in present day during the trailer as the camera pans up and the watch now appears broken. Now, I believe in the very early game, after a certain thing happens with Joel and Sarah, it actually isn't broken, but it more likely broke sometime along the way. I think it's a bit of misconception with some fans. I mean, I'm not holding myself at the pinnacle of The Last of Us knowledge, but a lot of people think that it broke during that. But if you actually watch the scene again, his watch is still intact. But I just think it's more symbolic in that during the 20 years since the very beginning of the game, of which we'll see in this show, and then when we pick up with the mission in escorting, or should I say smuggling, Ellie, it is kind of symbolic of the broken man that Joel became after the events of the beginning of the story, and still wearing it as his prized possession. And yeah, as we know, these early parts of the story that are showcased in the teaser, a very, very tragic thing happens during Joel, Tommy, and Sarah's attempt to get to safety during the outbreak, and I can honestly only imagine how heart-wrenching that's going to be to watch, especially with Pedro Pascal. I freaking love that guy, and you're probably going to hear me constantly complimenting him in this video. I'm sure many of you out there are big fans of Pedro Pascal. I think it's like a spot-on casting. I know some people were contemplating that, as well as Bella Ramsey for Ellie, but I think they're both incredibly capable actors who will bring these characters to life. Now, one of the opening clips of this trailer is when we actually see Joel strolling through this town, if you will, and this is definitely post-outbreak, if you will, because in present day, it's actually 20 years after the very beginning of the story with his daughter Sarah and his brother Tommy. You can see how his hair's a little bit more gray compared to some of those earlier story shots. The song that is playing in the background is Alone and Forsaken by Hank Williams, which is, again, taken right out of the game. And they do a good job at showcasing what society is like 20 years post the fungal infection outbreak. We get to see the curfew that they have from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Outside of that, you're subject to immediate arrest. And of course, instructions to report signs of the cordyceps infection. And the cordyceps infection is exactly what caused everything. Now, this particular shot of Joel strolling through the town is likely before he has the task of escorting Ellie to the Fireflies in order to create a cure for the infection. Perhaps just kind of showing a day in the life of. And speaking of the Fireflies, we can actually see here that their signs are being covered up in this shot. These people of the town are being watched by federal guards. We also see in the trailer Marlene, of whom is actually the leader of the Fireflies. Now, this certain shot of Marlene looks to be from the very early part of the story, at least, 20 years later after the very beginning of the story, because we can see that Marlene is holding her wound here to her abdomen, which will be following that part in the story between Robert, Joel, and Tess. We then cut some footage of Ellie and Joel navigating their way to their destination, which is pretty much the entire game and the main plot, because as we just went over, they do a massive cross-country trek and where Joel is smuggling her from Boston all the way to Utah. So you can imagine the danger that they encounter. And I'm not talking just about infected, but also the remnants of people who aren't in quarantine zones. And those people are pretty crazy ass people, shall we say. An example of this would be that shot later on in the teaser where we see this somewhat armored car absolutely charging, and on the front of it, it says run, which is most likely the take on when Joel and Ellie encounter some of those crazy ass people that I was talking about. But speaking of Joel smuggling Ellie out, we have some footage here of where it looks like we get some of the earlier portion of where you have the federal guards swarming out into the streets while Joel and Ellie try and make their way out of this quarantine zone. That part of the game is where you have federal guards pursuing you. Now, who is Fedra, for those who aren't familiar or haven't played The Last of Us Part 1? They're essentially the remnants of the old government before this outbreak, and they're more or less the authority of these quarantine zones. And let's just say that they are pretty hated, with even some quarantine zones having uprising by the people or that of the Fireflies. But, for example, the quarantine zone that we see Joel strolling through at the very beginning of this trailer, which is Boston, is still very much so occupied by Fedra, which is why it's a little bit of a hard thing for Ellie, Joel, and Tess to make their initial escape out into their journey cross country. And up next, we see some shots of exactly that. For example, you can see Joel, Tess, and Ellie here in this pipeline. We also see a clip of Joel beating the living crap out of one of these federal guards. This is very likely the portion of their escape out into their cross-country trek, in where one of the federal guards actually scans Ellie for the infection, and it turns up positive. And as many of you know, or if you don't know, this is the very reason that they're transporting Ellie, as she could be somewhat this kind of last hope for humanity. And that's because when you're usually bitten by this infection, you normally turn very quickly. I think even as quick as a couple of days. But the thing about Ellie is she was bitten from around 3 weeks ago from this point in the story. Yet she's all good, which implies that she's immune. So Joel, Tess, and Ellie, or at least Joel and Ellie, shall I say, need to make that journey all of the way across the country to the Fireflies in an effort to find a cure, or make a cure from Ellie. We get some more shots of the travel up next, and it just looks really, really awesome. As I was mentioning earlier, I feel like they've captured the tone, the kind of forsaken landscape of the world outside the quarantine zones, such as this abandoned city area here at night. And speaking of these shots, this is the part in the story as well, as reflected in the trailer as it unfolds, where shit gets really, really real in the game, and also the show, and in turn at this point in the trailer. That's because at this point in the game, or in the story if you will, you're quite outside the scope of the quarantine zone and thus Fedra, yet you're kind of entering the land of the infected and thus the clickers. Don't get me wrong, we'll be seeing the infected before this, for example, the very beginning, but just to emphasize, at this portion, when they're outside the quarantine zone, this is when they'll need to be very stealthy. Now, there are various types of infected, but what we see here in the trailer are people who have been infected for quite some time, to the point of where they've reached the clicker stage, I guess you could say. This infection, as I mentioned earlier, is a parasitic fungal infection, and that's why you kind of have these fungus-esque growths the longer you have this infection and the longer you're a zombie, if you will. And with regards to a clicker, you can get to the point of where the clickers can't see, but they make those kind of clicking noises to more or less echolocate their way around. And that's why you see in this part of the trailer, and this is probably one of my favorite moments in the teaser trailer, you see Pedro Pascal's Joel looking basically absolutely terrified and cautious as he holds up his finger to his mouth to signal to Ellie to not make a noise. Moments like this are going to provide fantastic tension, and I feel like the potential for the tension with just, you know, comparing it to that of your other zombie flicks, if you know what I mean, or shows, not putting them down, it's just The Last of Us and the stealth that is required for clickers and whatnot, and bloaters and everything. Oh man, it is going to be insane. Now, I believe at this point in the trailer, this character we see here looking over these video feeds could very well be Bill. Now, who is Bill? Well, he's a character who Joel and Ellie come across quite early into the game, who helps them get a car. He's quite a scavenger, and as a part of their time together, they need to go get spare parts for a car that he can fix up for them as a part of their journey. But while running into Bill, they kind of need to go through quite a few of his traps, as he set tons and tons and tons of these up to prevent the infected from getting to him, and that will be a pretty awesome part of the show, I'm sure. Now, next up, we actually see Storm Reed in the show, and I didn't actually expect to see her in the teaser trailer, but this is really cool because she is playing the character of Riley, and her character is actually a part of the DLC for the original game, in where it shows the story of how Ellie got infected and her relationship with Riley. Again, kind of shot for shot here, we see Riley and Ellie on the merry-go-round, and I wonder how they're going to incorporate this. It could just be one of those ways of formulaically showing an episode some present-day stuff, but then when, you know, you get a spare few moments here and there where Ellie might be daydreaming on a part of the journey, it might cut back to Riley, for example, and how she got the bite a few weeks beforehand. Or it could just be like one full sequence when she's recapping events to Joel. I think that would be a pretty good way of doing it, especially with Ellie getting to know Joel and vice versa. I mean, at first, Joel is very cold, but that's a brilliant part of this story, is just kind of breaking down Joel and the broken man that he is, but the way he kind of navigates himself back, if you will, the more he spends time with Ellie. Okay, so up next, and oh boy, we get a little tease of wintertime, and I'm sure many of you fans know exactly what this is going to entail. Now, this is a very brief tease, but to match that in the trailer as well, we get another winter shot in where Joel is holding Ellie's face as though she's in shock. There's blood all over her face. And again, this is likely, probably, especially that second shot towards the end, or at the end of the winter storyline, with regards to what happens with Ellie and a character, a very messed up character, and his messed up people, David. Let's just say him and his people are a bunch of cannibals, and shit just goes sideways. Joel dips out the story a little bit due to being injured, and what's really cool about this, and why I'm anticipating this part of the show so much, is because it shows this grueling journey that Ellie goes on by herself for a bit, because again, Joel is just like out cold, and you have this young girl just out in the wilderness and the world trying to figure things out, but then runs into these people. So I'm sure this part with blood on Ellie's face is possibly the aftermath of what happens between her and David. Other little shots in the trailer show, I believe, Henry and Sam. I think Ellie could be there as well, and this could be during their escape. We get some other characters featured in this trailer. For example, there's this character standing beside Marlene. I'm just guessing that it's potentially an extra character, another Firefly that they're just inserting into the story. There's other characters that I might not have mentioned just because I don't exactly know who they are that do crop up in the trailer, but let me know if you have an idea as to who they could be, what role and what part they could play in this first season. And then the very end of the trailer just ends on a nice shot of Joel and Ellie kind of standing together and then them riding on a horse. And that more or less just ends everything I have to say about the teaser. So my overall review of it is that it looks really good, like really good. I'm sure I'm a little bit biased with regards to Pedro Pascal because, and also the game. I'm a big fan of the game. I haven't played the remake. I'm not dying to play it just because I played the remaster. Before I ramble too much about that, it's a very good story. Like, if you're a fan of PlayStation games, like ones that show that parental relationship, you know, it's a bit cold at first, but then it kind of breaks its way down and you get really attached to the characters. Another example of this is God of War, for example, Kratos and Atreus. And now, you know, with this, it's like that. So if you play God of War and you don't know what The Last of Us is like, even though how do you play God of War and not play The Last of Us, Joel and Ellie is very similar. So seeing that being brought to fruition in live action with such attention to detail, they knew they wanted to put a lot into this show given how popular the property is. It's got double thumbs up from me, at least, with this first proper look. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm going to read every single comment, as I always do. It's very easy for me to flick through my phone and can't wait to see what you have to say about this. If you want to see more coverage on this, do let me know. You can also leave a like on the video to just get this out there a little bit more. It's not like I have a massive The Last of Us audience, although many of you subscribers may be very big fans of this game, so just know that I will be covering it on the channel. So do turn those notifications on and subscribe if you are brand new. But that's everything from me, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow, I don't know, frickin' Fireflies in the next video. Goodbye.